If you're a founder for a startup or a leader in a business or you're an influencer in some way, you're going to, at some point, need to convince people to follow what you have to say. But if you don't have a good way of telling a compelling story, then your message is going to fall flat. And the impact that you hope to make in the world probably just isn't going to ring true for a lot of people. So, this week's episode, we sit down with Michael Hauge, a 43 plus year veteran in the world of storytelling. You've probably heard of guys like Russell Brunson from ClickFunnels or Will Smith. Well, Michael is the guy behind the scenes helping these individuals to tell truly compelling stories. So, if you want to make an impact in this world as you continue to be the high achiever that you are, then listen in as Michael tells us about his 6-step process for storytelling and the hero's journey as he sees it. Michael Hauge in the virtual building. So thankful that you're here today, bud. I really appreciate you coming on and telling us about some stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
This is podcast is kind of in my mind like a game show. It's like whoever tells the best story wins. That's my motto. So let's see if we can play that out today. If not,
I love that.
at least help other people know how they can win with the best story.
That's the goal for today. I love that. We're going to be talking so much about stories, but I'd love to jump right into it, Michael, with this idea that we talked a little bit about. My listeners are servant-hearted, growth-minded high achievers. And while they're constantly striving to do things, I think sometimes they have this limiting belief that they don't have a good story to tell, or they're not somebody who tells stories very much, even though you and I both agree that that's probably not the case. So can you give me a sense, or give the listeners a sense of why storytelling would be important to them if there's somebody who's a business owner or an entrepreneur or somebody who's not maybe on stage all the time?
Sure. Well, it's sort of a layered answer, because the first reason a high achiever or a business owner should be telling stories is for the same reason that a low achiever, someone down in the rung, should be doing it, or anyone who's a novelist or a screenwriter and so on. And that is, in a nutshell, my belief is most of all stories create connection. They create connection. More specifically, a story creates a connection between the storyteller and the audience, or specifically between the hero, the main character of the story, and the audience. By audience, I could mean reader. So maybe it's a story in a book that someone is writing, or on a blog, or in a situation like this, I guess this is more audience than reader. Same thing. But the way stories do that is stories create an emotional experience for the audience, for the listener. And they do that by creating a connection between the audience and the hero of the story that penetrates to sort of the level of the subconscious. Not sort of, that's what it does. Because the subconscious is about feeling as opposed to data and thinking so much. And so let's say you're a business owner, and let's say you were to tell a basic story about how your business, either you personally or one of your team members or the product you create or so on, changed the life of someone. They were able to, with this product or process, they were able to make more money or lose weight or be healthier or win a marathon or whatever the business is, whatever problem the business is promising to solve. Because every business is about solving problems, basically. It's just, are you targeting a market who wants to solve that or wants to achieve that goal? Okay, so if you tell a story about someone who benefited from whatever the business is creating or offering, and the audience for that story identifies or empathizes with the hero of that story, we can talk about how one does that, then you're actually subconsciously giving them the experience of actually using the product. They emotionally feel like they've already worked with the company. They've already sampled or used the process because they have become the hero of the story. And so if the story is about one of your customers or clients who solved a problem or achieved a goal, and you tell us how they did that, it's not just that we in the audience are learning the data about it or interested in it. We become that character, and so we are actually achieving the same goal. We are actually using whatever your business or your process is, and we win because it's a happy ending story that you're going to tell. So wherever you are now, so if like you're a business leader, as you say, or a high achiever, Now, any high achievers I've worked with or known, they always end up getting interviewed on a podcast, or they always are invited to be on stage. Or sometimes you might be someone with a company and you don't go out in the world to try and get customers, but you need to lead your team, your groups, your managers, your marketers, or whatever it might be. Okay, so at some point, at least once a year, if you have a conference or a retreat or something, you're going to need to get in front of this group and you want to inspire them to do better or inspire them to stay with the company or just get pumped up about what they do and so on. And I guarantee you the most powerful thing you can do to accomplish that is to tell a story, because you could stand on stage at this retreat, or you could be on a podcast like this or whatever, and you could, like I am now, say, well, give all the data, give all the facts, or give the step by step of what you should do. But when you can tell a story about someone who once worked or is working or did something for the company, or a story about yourself and how you came to found the company, what your origin story is, then you give the audience, you give your employees, if you will, the experience of actually getting turned on like you did about whatever the company is. The experience of being like the hero of the story, a marketer who was able to transform or make a big sale or whatever it might be. So if you aren't doing that, then to me, your quiver doesn't have enough arrows in it. Because yes, you need to know the facts and figures. If you're a computer programmer or whatever, you need to know about all those bits and bytes and things that I don't personally understand. But
Mm-hmm.
none of that is going to be as emotional as a story. It's like, because when you tell a story, it's like you're a screenwriter. You're creating a movie in the mind of your audience. And when you do that, that's when you do what Hollywood does so well. And that is elicit emotion, create an emotional experience. And out of that emotional experience, people will be persuaded. Because your
Yeah.
ultimate goal is, once they have experienced what the hero of your story does, then they are much more likely to take the action you want them to take in whatever, using your company. Or maybe you're not about your company at all. Maybe you've been asked to give a presentation to raise money for a foundation. But still, people are going to be, you want your speech to just inspire people, tell them how to
Mm-hmm.
live better in some way. But to live better, to do anything, it's like in all of your podcasts, every one of your guests, me included, is really saying, this is how I think people can live better. And you talk
Mm-hmm.
about that yourself when you do your own, when you take over your own podcast and do it yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. So whatever you're trying to do, you can persuade people to live better or make a change or transform, first of all, by getting them emotionally involved and convincing them with a story. Then you can't stop there. The presentation, the retreat, or whatever it is, it doesn't end with a story. I mean, you can entertain people with a story and get them pumped up, but then you follow it with content, I'd say. Okay, know how that character in the story did this? Well, here's how we can help you do that. Here are the steps you take. Here are the things you do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so powerful on so many levels, because I teach entrepreneurship at a university here, and I see pitches all the time. And I can tell you the best pitches, especially the ones where they actually listen to me for once, are the ones that start off with, this is important to me because this happened to me once. And they tell a very sincere story of how I remember an experience once. This wasn't one of my students, but their child was choking in the backseat of the car, and they were an actual nurse. They were first aid certified, CPR certified, and they froze because in the moment that stress response prevented them from being able to act because it was their own child. So luckily the husband was able to save the child, but the wife said never again. And so she actually created this little pad where you could put it on the child's chest. It was the size of a child's chest, and you could carry it around in your wallet, and it gave you the exact step by steps on how to approach this. And that product, which was on a show, it sold like hotcakes because people could emotionally respond to that idea of not being able to take care of their child when it really mattered. If she would have started with the facts and the figures about how many children die it's like, okay, great, but that's not my child. I don't have to worry about that. Well, no, I'm a human. I'm a mother. I'm a nurse, just like you. And just like you, I can make mistakes. And this is the mistake that happened to me. And so starting with that story instead of the facts and the figures was so powerful because people, like you said, people buy off of emotion and then they justify it with
Yes.
logic and data.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I didn't exactly say that, but you just did very well. What it's interesting to me is I don't know, but you just did a great job of telling two different stories at once, and it followed the exact formula, if you will. People don't really like the word formula, at least creative writers and so on, but that's it. Because
Uh-huh.
if you take the story she told, it was really very simple. You set up and said, she was a registered nurse, and she said this happened to her one time. So we'll just take her story. So she's
Mhm.
saying to people, I was in this situation, and then my son, I think you said it was, did
Mhm.
something, went into a seizure or something like that. Okay, whatever it
Sure.
was. Okay, when you tell a story, that's the crisis. First, you
Mhm.
introduce the hero, and then they have a crisis, and this was the crisis. Then step two is, after the crisis, they got to figure out, what am I going to do? Okay.
Yeah.
And finally they decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Now, in that story, what she did, because it was very short, the way you told it was, so what she did is, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And you said, luckily your husband was there. So what she finally did is ask her husband. He knew how to solve that problem, stop the kid from choking or whatever it was. Okay.
Mhm.
And so then the climax of the story was the kid was okay. And
Mhm.
then what you said, but the key to a story, any story, but you never end the story with the happy ending, with the
Yeah.
climax. You always add one more step, and that's what I call the aftermath. And so the aftermath was, she said, oh, I learned. She was almost telling a failure story in a way because she didn't know what to do. So she
Mhm.
fails, and she's saying, okay, but the lesson I learned, how my life changed after that was I was determined never again. So I decided to create this patch that could go on a kid's chest. And now, and because she tells the story, everyone hearing that story could be a childless man or a
Yep.
teenage boy, but they become a nurse whose son could die and has to save the day. And
Yeah.
that's why when you said, and so the way you told the story, now if you tell it, you made her the hero of your story too. And you told us how she made her pitch. So she figured out the best way to pitch and so on. So
Yeah.
you're telling her story to convince us that storytelling is a powerful thing to do because everybody was emotionally involved and they all bought a lot. And so when you
Yeah.
share that story with your audience, now people are thinking, yeah, I'd like to sell a lot of whatever widget they're manufacturing.
Yeah.
If you
Sure.
if you see, so it's sort of a two-layered thing the way you did that. It's great. It's great
Yeah.
because I haven't told any stories yet, but you just came up with one instantly that did a better job of persuading people that
Yeah.
this is a good idea than all the data I was giving about, well, here's why you should do this and this and this.
Though it's so funny, Michael, because a lot of people look at some of those big name figures, the stage, on stage presences. For instance, Russell Brunson. You're familiar with Russell,
Yeah.
and people go, "Oh, Russell's so awesome, right?" And Russell has a phenomenal process. But what I do is I read the acknowledgments of the authors. I read the people that are in their lives that are mentoring them and studying them. And when I saw your name, Michael Hauge, and how he talked about how phenomenal you were in storytelling, I'm like, that's a guy that I want to learn more from because Russell talks about this same premise of helping people understand how this process or this system, and we're definitely going to talk about your system here in a little bit because I think it's so impactful and important for people to understand the steps it takes to tell a really successful story. So we'll touch on that. But that to me is the power is in the process is when you can really systemize the way in which you can connect meaningfully with people. And that's something that I think all high achievers aspire to is the ability to connect meaningfully with the people they're in. And you can tell a good story to your team. You could tell a good story to your family. You could tell a good story to your parents in a way that helps them understand, you know what, this is something that matters to me. This is something that I can do. You can empower them to make a decision and take action. So, I think that your willingness to share your process with the world is making a huge difference in the way that people can connect.
Cool. Yeah, there's so many things you just said that I could unpack. The first thing I was going to say is to acknowledge Russell because he met before he had created ClickFunnels. This was now, I want to say 12 years ago. He had seen a video that I did called The Hero's Two Journeys. And he liked
Yeah.
that. He was partnered with a guy named Dagan Smith. And so they invited me to come to talk to their group. And I said, yeah, I don't know anything. I don't know about internet marketing. I was a Hollywood, I've worked for 40 years in Hollywood. And at that point, I wasn't doing much outside in the world of business. But he
Sure.
wanted me to come. And so I did my dog and pony show and did it. And I actually coached Dagan in front of the audience for this thing. There were probably about 50 or 60 people in the room. Russell gets more than 60. Russell gets like 5,000 now.
Yeah.
But then what he did is, and also I asked Dagan and Russell if they wanted me to coach them. I thought it'd be great if I could coach one of you in front of the room. And Russell
Yeah.
said, oh no. Because Russell, you may not realize, is actually quite shy. He's an introverted guy, but he knows
Sure.
how to get turned on stage because he's so passionate about ClickFunnels and so on. But
I love
then
it.
when he wrote his book, Expert Secrets, and I was reading what he did, because now we talked every once in a while, but he never told me this was going to happen. So I got Expert Secrets and I was riding my bike and listening to it, I was going through, and he used a narrator on that one. And so the narrator says, chapter 4, The Hero's Two Journeys. And I almost rode off the road because I thought, what did you do? You just ripped off my whole thing, that you got out of the thing. And then he opens that chapter by saying, I used to think I was a pretty good storyteller, and then I met a guy named Michael Hauge. And then he went on to show what I had talked about, because then he took that inner journey idea, which we can talk about, and he baked
Please.
it into his perfect webinar. And then he gave me a testimonial, which was nice too. And he says, the same thing, that he did a nice testimonial. And then he said that was the foundation. It's one of the mainstays of what came about or became ClickFunnels. So
Sure.
that was cool. That's
Yeah.
so yeah. And there was one other thing I was going to answer, and you were listing why it's so important for people to tell stories, because you can connect with your audience, or it could be your family, or it could be your coworkers or your team or whatever it might be. And what I wanted to drop in is it also, you can create a bigger connection with yourself. Because, and here's how that happens. Let's say you're asked to go on a podcast, or let's say you're, a CEO or someone like that, and you're in this spot, you're going to have to make some presentation. And somebody says, and we want to know how it came about that you created this company. It's what's known as an origin story. And oftentimes the origin story is misunderstood. People think my origin story is where I was born and where I went to school and so on, which is sort of a recipe for a boring story most of the time. But no, an origin story, at least my definition of it, an origin story is, how did you originate the process that you're now using to help people live better, to help people solve their problem? And by the way, I've almost never encountered not just high achiever, but people who are like marketers and so on, who are just in it for the money. They all like the money, but it's really like Russell's a great example. I mean, he's, really rich now because of ClickFunnels, but he's so sincere and he so just wants people to understand how they can flourish by using his ClickFunnels process. And flourish doesn't mean the same as have a lot of money. So anyway, getting back to this. So let's say you've got to make this origin story, how you created the thing, and you're thinking, well, what did I do? So you review what happened. How did you come about? Usually, well, I had a situation. I felt like there's got to be a better way to do this. I got fired from a job because they didn't like this, so I thought I'm going to do this on my own or whatever. But if you go back and you're looking at this and you're willing to dig deeper and get to the level of what was holding me back before I did this? What was the fear that I had to be able to overcome to really take risks? Because almost anybody who creates a company that survives had to go way out on a limb. I mean, I suppose there's exceptions, but really one of the biggest things for anyone to be successful is not the external obstacles. It's the fear. It's the inner conflict, the thing that holds us back. And if you are willing to go deep enough to share what that is with your audience and admit, I was scared to death when this happened. Or you don't need to use the word afraid, but I didn't want to do this because I was always raised to get help from other people. Or I was always raised never to ask for help from other people or whatever. And if you do that, what will happen is you will revisit the fear that you had felt and then realize, but I overcame that somehow. So it does two things. One, when you tell the story then becomes much more emotionally involving, much more impactful because the whatever you invented, if you're a high achiever, whatever your company does, there's 1,000 things that could stand in the way of doing that. But if you get to the level of what was I afraid of, it's universal. There's only a handful. Tony Robbins says there's only really two basic fears, and that is I'm not good enough and you won't love me. And he says, and mostly we feel, you won't love me because I'm not good enough. Because we all have felt like, an imposter. We've all felt like, God, I'm not going to be able to do that. This, other people might, but I won't succeed and so on. So what happens is you share that fear with, and even if it's with your company, and you think, well, I'm the leader and I can't show fear, I can't be vulnerable. That's exactly what you need to be. When you tell the story, admit that you are vulnerable. And then they're thinking, crap, I feel that way too. I'm afraid to step out on a limb and say what I really mean at the company because they might make fun of me or fire me or whatever. But when you do that, what happens is you also then remember the moments of courage that you showed, and that reinforces your own because you think, wait a minute, I'm still worried about the same things, but I got through that and I created this. And you realize more than just money or Fortune 500, you realize I was able to do this in spite of these things. And what I just described, that's what I refer to as the inner journey, the hero's two journeys. It's that inner journey of moving from fear to courage. It's moving from being stuck in your comfort zone because of some wound or trauma or pain in the past. And you have these beliefs that, don't get too big for my britches, or don't depend on other people, or people will be out to screw me, or whatever the false belief was. And then how you wanted something so much, if it's your story, that it's not like you stopped being afraid. It's that you were willing to be afraid and go ahead anyway. And then you're really instilling courage. You're giving your audience an actual experience of being courageous. Because remember, they're empathizing with you as the hero of your own story, and you're giving them the experience that you had of finding the courage to go forward. And now they're going to be, my belief is, subconsciously, every story, everything that gives them the subconscious experience of being courageous and winning is going to move them to a more courageous or more loving or more vulnerable but positive or creative place. And that's really ultimately what you want for your team and your followers. You want them to be brave. You don't want them to be all in their comfort zone and not taking any risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on something I think is so important that I want to take a step back and have a hard start to it because we blurred into it, but I really want to make sure that the people who are listening get a sense for this thing you call the hero's journey, and how there's two kind of levels to it. From what I understand from hearing you talk, the internal and the external. And so can you give us a good understanding, because I think a lot of people who are listening, they don't want to admit it because they kind of have this sense of humility. Although we all treat ourselves like the center of our universe, we won't call ourselves the hero of our own story for whatever reason. But we are the hero of our own story. So can you share with the listeners kind of what that means, the hero's journey, and how you look at it?
Sure. Yeah. First thing I want to say that I might have forgotten to say, and that is I use the term hero differently than other speakers or storytellers might. Because to me, a hero is not someone who is heroic. All I mean by hero is the main character of your story. And if you're more comfortable, you could call it the protagonist or just say the main character. So you're the main character in your origin story. Okay. but it's not someone. Almost usually in most stories are about everyday people. Your origin story is when you were ordinary in some way. But the hero of the story can become heroic in the course of the story. So it's not that they're already a hero by my definition. They're already the main character. But do they find the courage to become heroic at the end?
Yeah.
Because the rule, and this comes out of watching, Hollywood movies for 70 years now, because everything I do is built on how Hollywood movies work, because that's how I learned these things and developed my approach to this and so on. Because I've been, working in Hollywood in the film industry, coaching screenwriters, but also producers and studios and movie stars and so on with their stories. And the principles apply regardless. So this hero, the hero's journey, it comes out of what Joseph Campbell developed or termed the journey. And that's seen as a self-contained thing. And it's about the hero starts in an ordinary world, because he analyzed stories going back millennia and found the same
Mm.
consistent thing. There's a hero, a main character, they're called to action, and they refuse the call, and then they finally are persuaded they should do it, so they leave the ordinary world, and then they go off to find the Holy Grail or conquer the Cyclops or whatever it might be, until finally they're victorious with the help of some characters and overcoming other characters until they achieve the goal and then come back with some elixir to where they started, because the courage of the hero is going to benefit everyone. Okay, so that's his
Mm.
thing. And I'm good friends with someone named Christopher Vogler, who wrote a book called The Writer's Journey, and he was sort of the person who translated the Joseph Campbell hero's journey for Hollywood. He sort of brought that whole idea. And also, it was when he did that shortly after Star Wars came out, and the word got out that George Lucas just took Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and used it all as the framework for Star Wars. So anyway, he did that. But I said to him one time, well, we should do something together on the stage, because we were friends and I loved what he said and we were showing up at the same conferences. And I said, why don't we call it the Hero's Two Journeys? Because you're doing the hero's journey, but I'm really interested in the psychology of it, the psychology
Mm.
of the characters and going deeper in the character. So that's how the name came. And so what I consider the outer journey is a journey of accomplishment. Okay. So take someone who let's say you're a consultant. Okay. And you're on the stage, or you want to try and persuade people to hire you as a consultant, to sign up
Mhm.
for a free call, or to sign up for your process or your home course or whatever it might be. Okay.
Sure.
So you're going to tell a story about that. So the outer journey is how one of your clients had a problem, and then they hit a crisis. I'll give you an example. This isn't a true one, but I made this up once and I like it. So let's
Mm.
say you're a consultant that's you're in the health arena, okay,
Mhm.
and you have a special process for helping someone with arthritis. Okay, so you tell the story, and your story is about a guy. You introduce him in his everyday life. You're not the hero. You'll come into the story, but he's going to be the hero of the story. And he's got crippling arthritis. And then the crisis he faces is his daughter comes to him and she says, I'm engaged. The wedding's going to be in 6 months. I want you to walk me down the aisle. And he can't. He knows he doesn't, he could barely hobble down. He doesn't want that and so on. So he's desperate to find a way to be able to do that. Okay. So then he finds you, if you're the storyteller, uses your process. You tell him the story, a couple of steps he took with you, a couple of obstacles he overcame. And finally, the climax is he's able to walk his daughter down the aisle. And the aftermath is that now he's back to playing tennis because he used your process. Okay. What I just described is the outer journey. It's visible. You can picture the guy, crippling arthritis, walking down the aisle, playing tennis, da da da. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the outer journey. It's a journey of accomplishment. The inner journey is if in telling his story, you go down to what is the fear that's holding him back from doing the process. I didn't make that part of this was all something I just thought as a for instance, but it might be his fear was trying to do this and failing because he's tried everything else. And he's so discouraged, says, I'm not going down there's no cure for arthritis. I can't do it. Might be, whatever happens, I'm going to limp. I'll be embarrassed to do that. Or it could be any number, but it's always going to boil down to some level of, you won't love me and I'm not good enough. That's how
Hmm.
so then if you bake into the story how he had to overcome his fear, whatever it was that this client had, now you're into the inner journey. It's not visible because it's inner. You can't picture fear. You can't picture courage. You can picture actions that exhibit it, but that's the inside. And the inner journey is, as I said, journey from fear to courage. But the cool thing, and you can see this in hundreds of Hollywood movies, is there's a rule, and that is if you go see a movie, if the hero isn't willing to find the courage to overcome that fear that grew out of some event in the past, if they can't find the courage and move into what I call their essence, let go of the emotional armor, then they can't get the goal. In other words, so it's like here's the rule of the universe, and that is you want this thing badly, or your hero wants it, but if they don't find the courage to overcome, to get out of their comfort zone, to let go of what I call their identity, their persona, the armor, the emotional armor we wear, then they're not allowed in the story, in a movie, to achieve the goal. And if they do find the courage, they have to achieve it. Okay? So it's when you tell a story, the outer journey is the basic 6 steps that you would take that hero through, and I can reveal those. The inner journey, the deeper level, the deeper connection you will have is when you're willing to show or reveal how you were afraid, how you were vulnerable, or make your hero afraid and give them the courage to drop the armor and become vulnerable and take a risk because they want the goal so badly they're willing to be afraid. Did that make sense, or did I
Oh,
dig you
a hundred.
go deeper into the rabbit hole of the 2 journeys?
The deeper the better. I love that. And what I love is it very, I mean, it applies in almost every story, if not every story of this idea, at least the good ones, of this idea of they go through some sort of external accomplishment, climb the mountain, build the business, do whatever it happens to be. But there are so many internal things that happen. And Michael, one of the things I want to ask you, because I think this will resonate a lot with the audience, and you may have to make some assumptions here, but do you think that a piece of the reason why so many people get caught up, I have a lot of people who get caught up in the wrong definitions, in my opinion, the wrong definitions of success, or at least not as meaningful definitions. For instance, they make the money, they drive the right cars, they do all these things. And when I heard your story of the 2 different heroes' journeys, it almost seemed as though sometimes people get so caught up in the external accomplishment, achievement, right? They saw the hero, they saw that at the end of the hero's journey, they got the girl, they made the money, they bought the house and all these things. It's easier to see that, and therefore we sometimes elude success to those external factors versus what really happens. And I think what Russell would say, what, some of the more successful people that you've talked to, and what a lot of heroes would say is, the money's nice, but who I became, who I am now is more meaningful to me than the external accomplishment. Do you get a sense for that?
Yeah, I get a good sense of it listening to your podcast, because that's sort of a common theme in what you talk about is what does success really mean? It's like, are you fulfilled? Are you finding joy in it, or whatever it might be? And so as far as stories are concerned, it's like movies. Every movie doesn't go to the level of inner journey. I didn't see, until the most recent ones, I've been watching James Bond movies since Dr. No premiered in the 60s. I'm that old. And I never saw any arc for James Bond. It was just, the emotion was all because of the conflict on the outside.
Sure.
Action and suspense and bad guys and so on. That's fine. There's nothing that says, and you could tell a good story without that too. You could tell, anyone who's, got the car and got the office suite or whatever they want, you could say, this is how I did this. I invested my money this way, or I created this product, and that's it. And that would be persuasive up to a point. So, and because the goal was make a lot of money, and I made a lot of money. And sometimes people will see people on stage, they want to come see them to see how did they make a lot of money. But it's up to the storyteller or them to be vulnerable enough or to decide to go deeper because what you just described would be a story. That story might be start out with the character saying, I had it all. I had everything I'd ever wanted and I was miserable. Or I had everything I ever wanted and I looked around and there was no one in my life. I coached someone who put a story into her TED talk and a story that she had told me, and she met somebody. She was networking and so on, met a guy, and he was just high level. And she thought, well, this is somebody she wanted to meet and get acquainted and maybe emulate and so on. And he reveals to her, yeah, I had cancer a couple of years ago, and nobody talked to me. He had no one to be there with him through cancer. I don't know if that character found it. I think that if you just want to tell a story about how to make a lot of money, now it might be you could tell a story about I made a lot of money, but I was determined that I was not going to get jaded by it. And it could be a story about, in fact, you've had a lot of guests who are quite well off or very successful financially, but they can weave into it. This was it. I just listened yesterday in the car, and I'm not going to remember names. I don't remember, but it was someone who'd author a book called Money Can't Buy Happiness.
Lloyd Ross, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And your whole discussion was, okay, well, why do people say money can't buy happiness? And why is that wrong? How can money buy happiness? And then it was all a discussion about that there's nothing wrong with making a lot of money if you do it honestly. But if that's the be all and end all, you're missing out on something deeper. You're missing out on having time, he was saying, or feeling fulfilled. And so you can tell just an outer journey story, or you can have two layers, but the inner journey could probably be, if what you say is true, that money in and of itself is not going to be a real good marker of success, then you either tell a story where someone makes money and figures out that what gives me more meaning is this, or you can tell what I call a failure story. And that is a story of someone who says, I did all this, I made all this money, and the climax of the story is nobody came to see them when they had cancer. That's sort of classic tragedy. A tragedy is when the hero cannot find what they truly need because they weren't willing to overcome the fear. Because that person, whoever it was, the friend of mine that I was coaching on her story, whoever that person was, I would almost guarantee was afraid of something that they couldn't face. Maybe they'd been raised with the belief that people are out to screw you. All you need is money. And then maybe that person had or had not realized, maybe I should have been going after something more than just, the Lamborghini or whatever they went after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. For one, you've referred to several of my podcasts, and I just have to say it means so much to me that somebody who is such a terrific and prolific storyteller finds my podcast to be interesting. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's unique that you mentioned this story of the hero that got everything and then realized that they still didn't have the life that they want. It hasn't come out yet, but there's it will come out by the time your podcast airs. So there's an individual by the name of Brandon Knoll who has come to speak at he's a guest lecturer for my course of entrepreneurship. He's also come on my podcast. And originally I had to convince him. He told me, I don't go on podcasts because I don't really feel like my story is helpful for people. And I said, no, Brandon, we're going to go on the podcast. And the reason is because he tells a phenomenal story. I hope people after listening to this will go listen to his, about how he was at the top of his game, Wall Street, going to Goldman Sachs, on the cover of a financial magazine. And he was sitting at a bar one day and he looked to his left and to his right and he saw a bunch of old guys with no wedding rings drinking a beer and having a burger. And he goes, that's not the life that I want to live. This is my future. And I'm going to be lonely and miserable and going to be sitting here 30 years from now with nobody in my life and a whole bunch of money for nothing. And so it was the exact same situation. And fortuitously, he had the aha moment that a lot of other people don't, and they keep going down that route. So it's just funny that you mentioned this story of a fictitious person, and I'm like, no, I've met the guy, and he has a phenomenal job now with a one loving wife and beautiful kids, and doing tremendous things here in Indiana for a company called Plug and Play. And so it's just so neat to hear you mention this story and say, and I actually can say this is the guy. I've met him.
That's cool. One of the things that caught my attention, I want to mention because I might not have thought of it otherwise, but when you said to him, he said, "Well, I don't think my story's that interesting." He was being shy, because he knew if he's telling that story, he's got to be vulnerable. He's going to have to be, because he has to own that he went down this path, and perhaps what led to that, what some of the wounds were, the beliefs were, and so on. But your words were, I said to him, "No, you're going to come on the podcast." And you were functioning for him as a character, a prominent character that will come into play in lots and lots of stories that I'm saying our viewers or listeners,
Yeah.
and that's what I call the reflection character. I'm going to use a couple of movie examples first, and I'll show you. If you think about, let's say, the movie Good Will Hunting. Okay. Now there's a guy. He's the Will Hunting. Matt Damon character. He's someone who's clearly wounded. He got the crap beat out of him. He was a foster child and he got beaten. And so the belief he came away with, not unusual in real life for a child who's abused to get, and that is, if all these fathers are beating me up, then I must deserve it. So it must be my fault. It must be me. Okay, so he's got that belief. And so his fear is, I can't let anybody see who I truly am, because then they're going to feel he's horrible, and then they're going to know. And so I'm a math genius. I'm a prodigy at math. I'm going to get a job at MIT, but I'm going to be a custodian. So no one will know I have that talent. And so he's stuck in this place. And then two things happen. He gets arrested, and they say, you got to go to a shrink. So he ends up seeing Robin Williams, the Sean character, and he meets a woman at a restaurant and falls in love with her. Okay, so now I've got a situation where his visible goal is, I want to win the love of this woman. And so, of course, the rule is, because I told you all this, and that is, if that's his goal, okay, he can't have it unless he can overcome his fear. He's got to let go of this identity he's created of just, I don't reveal myself, I won't say anything, and so on. So the character of Sean is his reflection. The reflection that's just a term. I mean, it doesn't mean for me. I just thought of it. I needed a term that wouldn't be confused with other terms. So I thought that's it, because it's sort of reflecting back. And so the reflection character in a movie is someone who is there to help the hero achieve the visible goal, but is also going to be there to sort of hold their feet to the fire. And every time they want to retreat back into the identity that's going to keep them from getting what they really need, they go to the hero in one form or another, say, this is bullshit. This is not who you really are. This is not your truth. This is not your essence. And so the movie is about him pursuing and then backing off from Skylar, meaning driver character he's in love with, to the point where once she says she wants him to come to California with her, and he says, no, I can't do that. I've got my life here. And so he says, what are you doing? And he says, you're a custodian. You can get that job anywhere, and and she says, what are you so afraid of? And he gets really mad and starts yelling at her. And she says, look, just tell me you don't love me and I'll leave you alone. I'll leave you forever. And he says, I don't love you, and walks out. And we know right down to his socks, she's his destiny, but he's too afraid to do it. But he's going to Sean, and Sean keeps saying, go do this, do this. And finally, Sean gets him to say, it wasn't my fault. And that's his transformation. And you can find the same character in numerous movies. If you've ever seen Shrek, who chases people away and Donkey says, you got a problem. And he says, I don't have it, it's everybody else. They see me coming and they say, here comes that ugly, scary, smelly ogre. And they run and run the other way. So he sees himself as unlovable. So he lives behind a barbed wire fence that says, keep out. But who keeps pushing him towards Fiona? He says, ogres are like onions. They have layers. And he said, no, they like onions. Parfait has layers. Everything that Donkey does is to move him towards his essence so he can win the goal. That's also a love story with Fiona. So when you were doing that, you were basically saying, unbeknownst to you, but it was just sort of was natural, but you're saying, no, you're going to come on this because you knew not deep down, you probably knew not only would it be valuable to your listeners, but he would feel much better by sharing his story and realize what a gift he's giving to people. So it was kind of I like talking about movies, but also the reason I want to share this about the reflection character is if you're a high achiever or if you're in business, in any business arena, and you're telling a story where the hero is someone you helped, either your process or your product, or you as a consultant, or they were in your audience at a conference you did or your course or whatever it was. If the hero is someone you helped, you are in the story as the reflection for that character. Mm-hmm. Now, what you want to avoid, the danger is don't make yourself the hero when it's their story. Don't say, well, I had this. Don't open the movie by saying, well, the first sentence should not be John or whoever your hero is. John came to me and wanted my help. Okay, no. First of all, it's not their everyday life. You got to tell us what was John's life all about. And then realize I need help. I need help because, like, whoever the guest is, I don't remember the guest's name, but, if he does tell that story, it's very possible that he realized I don't want my life to be that. He probably found at least one reflection. I need to learn the right way to live by going to see whoever, Tony Robbins or some other therapist or some friend. But that's how you fit into your hero's story. And that's why, well, it's sort of manipulative, but I think good movies are always manipulative because we want to experience the emotion. But the reason you want to be in the story as the reflection is because you're telling the story to persuade people to use your product or process, and you have to establish that you know what you're doing and that you're honest and that you're reliable and you'll commit. But if you just get up and tell the audience, I'd like to introduce myself, I'm honest and I'm reliable and I'm a good, and so on. But when they experience the story through the hero that you helped, you're giving them the experience of working with you and getting the same help. And that's going to draw them to you or your company and so on. So it's part of the reason you want to create that connection is because you're trying to persuade them to work with you or to work with either you or your product or your process because you want to help them live better. And they can't live better with your help if they don't come and hire you or work with you.
Sure. So,
it's just because you said that one thing, but it was a really good illustration to me of how, how a reflection character works.
Yep. Yeah. So I want to unpack two quick things there, Michael, because I appreciate all those things you said. And this is more for Brandon if he ever listens to this. But Brandon was already on the path to recognizing my story does matter. I just happened to catch him at the right time and say the right thing to help him realize he will be a great guest and he does have something to share. So he was kind of already on that path. I don't want to take all that credit. But to your point, the fact that you mentioned, the reflection character, Don Miller, who I'm sure you are at least aware of, he wrote Story Brand. He talks about the idea of you're your hero's sidekick. And so if you're trying to sell something to somebody, you have to realize you're the sidekick, you're not the hero. And that took a little bit of ego check for me when I first read it many, many years ago. But now I relish in that role. When I told Brandon that, I knew exactly what I was doing. My goal as a coach is to bring out the best in people, but it's already in them. To your point, I'm just a part of their journey of helping them. It's like the Yoda, right? Don talks about Yoda being the kind of the coach or the mentor, the sidekick for Luke as he goes on his journey. And so I love that role. I think it's phenomenal. I think too, one thing that you mentioned that I think a lot of people hesitate when it comes to storytelling. They think, well, I don't want to trick people into an emotional response so they buy my stuff. And so the thing that I tell people when they have that mentality is there's two different ways that you can get somebody to feel an emotional response and do something about it, or at least in my opinion. One of them is you manipulate them. The other one is you inspire them. And the difference to me is manipulation is I'm going to get you to do something for my benefit, and inspiration is I'm going to get you to do something for your benefit. And so I think it's important and all of that comes down to intention. I think, yes, storytelling and marketing, all of it is getting them to have an emotional response. I think the question becomes, are you doing it because you truly want to serve the people that are helping you? And as Russell says, you got to know you have value to bring them. Like that's the first, like you got to know you can bring them value. But then it's a question of, are you manipulating or are you inspiring?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I agree with you completely. And one of the easy questions to ask is, are you lying to them? Now, I have a motto, and that is when you're telling a story for business, it must be true. It doesn't have to be factual. Which people tease me about. But what I mean by that is, okay, maybe you're telling a story that where you're really combining two clients into one fictitious one, but you can't say I had 10 people were made billionaires in a year because they worked with me. That's just out and out. Okay,
Love that.
but what's interesting about that, and people people probably will like me less for saying this, is if you're someone who has said or would say or said to Coach Woody, I don't want to, I don't want to manipulate somebody into working for me, or something like that. I would ask, what is the fear behind that statement? Because I bet you're really not likely to do that. I think it sounds like a statement. Now, I should say, I'm not a licensed therapist, and, this is just for entertainment value. But because you're the hero of your own journey, your own story. And when you say that, it's what I call it's your identity, it's your false self, it's talking, to you, because the goal of your identity is keep you safe and don't let you take risks. And it's such an easy thing to say, well, I don't like the idea of telling stories because or emotional stories because it'll manipulate people into doing this. I don't think that's really what's going on. I mean, it is going on. I think you've just found that as a ready excuse not to tell stories. And certainly, I never, I talk about manipulation because in a certain way, you are bringing out an emotional experience that you want people to have, but not to do it deceptively. But I think that what you want to say is, okay, let's just say, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to manipulate anybody falsely and try and pull the wool over their eyes. But what is it about telling a story that makes me want to make that an excuse? What's really fear underneath? What is the consequence I think might really happen if I get on stage and tell a story? And my guess is it's going to lead somewhere to, like, to be honest, I just don't want to fall on my face, which is a very genuine fear, especially if you're talking about public speaking. It's, 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 it's like Jerry Seinfeld says, the number one fear is, public speaking. And it means if there's a funeral, you'd rather be the person in the casket than the person giving the eulogy. It's like this great thing. But it's just, I would suggest that if you're having that kind of thought, I'm not saying you should or should not get on a stage or tell a story or not tell a story, but it would be valuable to really stop and say, okay, what do I really think might happen? What is it I'm really afraid might happen? And if you want to go deeper, say, where did that come from? And what do I believe about that? Because now you're getting into your own inner journey, and then it might help you discover that the reason you really don't want to talk is because you think you'll fall on your face because you got horribly embarrassed when you were at a recital in the second grade. And those kind of wounding experiences that we think we've forgotten or didn't make any difference really can. That's all.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree.
I challenge the, manipulation thing. I just say, if your ideal is to be honest and not manipulate people falsely into buying your product or hiring you, then that sounds like a good thing to me. But don't jump all the way to say, I don't want to tell any stories because I will be forced to do that.
Yes. Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. So, Michael, I know asking a storyteller to give us a brief overview of something is like asking a fish not to swim. But I'm gonna ask you if you could, because we're
You can't get me to shut up with even not asking. Knows if you ask it.
no, no, I want this is an important aspect, but I want it to be a sampler so that people go and actually find more details through the channels that you have. So can you you hinted at this idea of this 6-step process. Can you give us a brief summary in just a minute or two here of what that looks like so that people go, that's something I need, and so they can go and follow more, and we'll make sure that they get a link to it and
Sure.
they can access it and we can share that. But give us a brief overview.
The thing I want to offer everybody, the free thing, is there's a chart that lays out what I consider the 6 essential steps of any story. And it's based on movie structure, as I said, and it's based on pretty much all stories, but especially this is the structure Hollywood uses to maximize the emotional experience and really make the story work at a good level. I kind of pared it down a bit for length because movies are 2 hours long and your business speech might be 5 minutes, but that's it. So I'm just going to run through. These are the 6 steps. These are the steps your hero will take. And I've mentioned almost all of them in passing. So this is it. Step number 1 is the setup. In the setup, you introduce us to the hero of your story living her everyday life, okay? Not already in action to do something. She's living her everyday life. This is how she's been doing it some time. When they're introduced, you want to create empathy with them. So you either get us to feel sorry for them, they're a victim in some way, or get us to worry about them, they're in danger of losing something of value to them, or they're likable, they're kind and good-hearted and so on. So introduce them that way. That's step 1. Something new has to happen to them. So step 2 is what I call the crisis. Something must happen. So in the story I made up about the guy who has arthritis, we see him suffering from arthritis, and whatever his life is like, he can't move and he sits around or whatever it is. The crisis is that moment when his daughter says, I want you to walk me down the aisle. So now this new thing has happened, and now he's got to figure out, oh no, what am I going to do in response to this? Okay. So they try and figure out what are they going to do. And if you're telling a story about someone you helped, they're figuring out different ways to get help until they finally discover, oh, you might be a good option. And that's when they start working with you. That's step 2. And in step 2, that's when they are going to formulate a specific visible goal. And by visible, I mean we can picture what it is. His goal was not, I want to be happier. I want to be successful. I want to be fulfilled. It's what's the thing? What's the object? What's the finish line they want to cross? Okay. So in the setup, in stage step 2, this new situation or after this crisis, then they're going to declare, this is what I want. Okay. Or they've met you, you're working with them, and they decide they're going to use your process to make, to walk down the aisle, or to make $100,000, or to make rent, or whatever. Now, step 3 and 4 are sort of combined. Step 3 is pursuit of the goal, and step 4 is conflict, the obstacles. So in telling a story about your process or whatever, you want to don't lay out every single thing you're going to do with somebody, but 1 or 2 examples of what you have them do if you're a coach, or 1 or 2 steps of what's involved in using your product, or what's involved in taking all of the steps you're going to give them to become a fly fisherman or whatever. So what are a couple of the steps, and what are the couple obstacles that make that get difficult? Because if you tell a story and you say, so then I started working with him, and and a half hour later they were cured. No one's going to buy that. It's hard to get people. I mean, you can get people because a lot of us want to get rich quick. But it's going to be the more genuine story where you say, so we took this step, and then the person, or one of the problems was they were worried about money. And so I told them, well, we can work out a different arrangement. So we worked out a different arrangement for that. Or they were getting too tired, so we just modified their process. Okay, so pursuit and conflict. Step 5 is the climax. That's just, you've got to tell us what happened when they achieved the goal. We've got to envision them crossing the finish line. Okay, whatever that is. So the climax of the wedding story is he walks her down the aisle. And you could picture that. And then step 6 that I mentioned, that's the aftermath. And that's you saying, okay, so they achieved the goal, my customer client achieved that, or I finally was able to establish my business and start helping people. And now, over the last 5 years, the business has grown like this. Or since then, I said in the arthritis story, I said, and since he walked her down the aisle using this pill or process or whatever, now he's back to playing tennis 3 times a week and da 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 da. And that's it. And last thing, and that is the aftermath, the new life that your hero is living needs to match what your audience dreams of. It's the life they want to be living. Maybe not specific. Maybe your client now owns a yacht and they don't want that. They want to live in the mountains and have a vacation home. But it's a picture of wealth and freedom. That's what they want. That's it. And what he was saying is, if there's a link, whatever it is below or somewhere it's here on this podcast, if you go to that link, then you can download a chart, and the chart shows the 6 steps and has a more detailed definition of what each one of those is. And then that can be your framework for any story you tell. It can be any story you tell, either for business or on film, if we've got any screenwriters here and so on.
Maybe, just maybe. Let me ask. Go ahead, Michael.
No, I was going to say, screenwriters want to find wealth and happiness and so on. They can learn a lot.
Absolutely. So let's play the picture. So the hero of the story is our listener. They're a high achiever. They've been striving. They finally figured out that all the work that they've been doing hasn't paid off. And so they've changed the name of the game. They've started to learn storytelling and their ability to connect more meaningfully with people. And now they're going through that journey. What would you paint a picture of the climax and their aftermath after having better learned how to tell good stories? I want you, can you give us what that might look like for them? Give our listeners their climax and their aftermath.
Well, it could be so. Actually, it's better if they figured out, if we're talking about telling stories, what do you want out of telling stories? The client, if the goal is just I want to get on stage and tell a story, it'd be more vivid if you said, and I want to get on stage and be able to tell my story to 100 people. Or you might have this. I've been asked to give a presentation at our company's next conference. Or I've got to give a present. So whatever it might be. So let's just pick. Well, what would yours be? Okay, so what would be your goal around storytelling? Can't be on this, but what would your dream for storytelling be?
Absolutely. By the end of the story, when they've listened to the story that I've told and the stories of my clients, that they realize that they can be successful and satisfied at the same time and continue to pursue high level goals and aspirations while still also being fulfilled in what they do. And so they're living their life in a way that's congruent with what matters to them, and they're successful by the standards that society sometimes likes to put on us.
Okay. So that's good. I understand that goal okay. Now let's say that's your goal for your story, and now you want to tell their story. That's hard to vividly picture. So if you could say, because if your goal is to give the presentation, okay, to this group, then the climax is you give the presentation. You want to do that. Otherwise, if your goal is to change someone's life, then you have to figure out how are you going to know that. But so if you can, it might be more specific. So I want to give a speech, and then at the end of the speech, I want to hear from at least 10 people that they had taken the next step in the process you were defining. Okay, I'm not saying your ultimate goal isn't a good idea, but I'm thinking in terms of storytelling. So a story about you telling the story, the climax would be you telling the story. Or it might be the goal of you telling the story is you want however many people in the audience, you want 5 people to hire you as a coach, or you want 5 people to sign up or to subscribe to your podcast. Because in storytelling terms, the more vivid and specific the goal, the better. Because now it doesn't mean your ultimate goal is not to change people's lives. And one of the steps in doing that is telling a story. But you said, what would our listeners' story be as they go through this? You also skipped steps 3 and 4. That was pursuit and conflict. And
Yep.
so the story would really be, okay, you're everyday, if you're in the audience, we'll just play this out. It's kind of self-serving, so be prepared. Okay. But the thing is, wherever you were before you turned on or started listening to or watching this podcast, that was your everyday life.
Hmm.
Then the crisis or opportunity, you would think, because it's more that, is you hearing us talk about storytelling. And now you think, okay, I want to do that. Sounds like a good idea. I should be telling more stories. And so, as a result of the opportunity or crisis, you could call it crisis because now you got to deal with it. Now you got to
Yeah.
figure out what can I do? What can I do? And then you decide you're going to have to get help. You're going to have to learn how to do it better. And so you go, right. So you could go anywhere. One place you might go is come to me because I can help you tell better stories. I could be the reflection, and that is you could come to me in terms of reading my book, or you could come, well, you're going to get the free chart, but you could read the book and do that, or you can work with me more closely by getting my course. There's a course I had called Hollywood Storytelling, or best of all, you could come and I could guide you, one on one. That's the best way that I could help you do the story. So now if you decide, okay, I want to tell this story that you have to tell, and you make me the person, and it could be, I mean, you could throw a stick and probably find somebody who said they could help you with stories, but I said it would be self-serving, but you do. Okay, now whatever you do, let's say you want to work with me. Now, the pursuit and conflict is the pursuit is I'm going to take you on a path that will help you create a better story. I've done that with lots of people. The conflict
Mm.
is going to be I'm not going to tell the story for you. In other words, you have to learn. It's a learning curve, and you have to practice, and you have to write it out, and so on. And we take those steps, and then the ultimate goal, we'd figure out what exactly is your goal. I don't want to go off too much, but I'm excited about this because about January, I think it was, I got a call from someone who said, I would like your help telling two stories because I'm applying to law school and I'm supposed to tell two stories in the application. And I said, what I often say, truth in lending. I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. I can have a story. I don't know anything about law school. I think I said, everything I know about law school comes from watching two movies, The Paper Chase years ago and Legally Blonde about 10 years ago. I don't know. But I said, I can do it. And so she said, that's fine. So she had a couple ideas. So I worked with her to get the story so it'd really be good. And I knew it would be emotional. I don't know anything about what their screening process is, but I figure somebody's gonna read these, and I think they'll enjoy them. And I got a call from her last week. She got accepted into Brooklyn Law School.
Hey.
Again, I'm generally such a modest guy. It's an identity thing, but I was very excited about doing this. But she didn't get it. I didn't say, let me write these stories for you and put them in the thing. And we didn't use AI at all. She needed to come back and we did a few drafts and, so on and so on. So that'll be the thing. The climax will be when you give the story, tell the story, whatever it is, if it's for business. And the aftermath will then be, okay, how did your audience respond? Did they take the action that you wanted them to take? So, and that's it. And it's the same 6 steps. And I hope I made it emotional enough that you would at least go for the chart, and then you can find out how you might work with me otherwise.
It was a beautiful story about writing stories.
Yeah.
I love that. Story inception.
It was a little manipulative, wasn't it, though? So,
I I know I'm going to be checking out that chart for sure. So,
well,
Michael, we appreciate you so much for taking the opportunity to help us better understand stories because I think everybody listening and every human has a story that they can tell, and the better that they can tell it, the more I think that they're going to get out of life. So, thank you so much for all the work that you do.
I would say one last thing I'd say if you're reluctant, and storytelling takes work, but it's not, rocket surgery, as they say, because it's something you've been doing your entire life. You
Yeah.
know, you just lack some of the craft of how to lay it out in a more emotional way. But it's not. It's just you sharing some part of yourself with other people, and the payoff is you connect more closely with the people you share with. And to me, that's a high a thing to strive for. I think connection is sorely missing in many areas of life right now. And if you can do
Yeah.
anything to strengthen a connection between you and people you're close to, or your community, or your school, or the universe in general, go for it. And thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Coach Woody.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this. It was fun. I knew it would be.
As did I. As did I. Yes, I knew it was going to be phenomenal. So thank you, Michael, so much. And we'll talk soon. Make it a great day.
You too. Take care.
Can you tell that Michael loves stories? I know I could. Such a passionate guy. So, if you want to learn more about Michael's 6-step process, then be sure to check out the link in our show notes to make sure that you can find that PDF that he talked about and learn how you can create your own successful story. Also, make sure you check out his book, Selling Your Story in 60 Seconds. And he also has a phenomenal one called Writing Screenplays That Sell. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can Google him, and I promise you, you're going to find Michael Hauge. What a great way to better understand how we can tell our own stories that resonate so that we can connect more meaningfully with the people around us. So if you love this story and you love this episode, be sure to subscribe to us, The Next Better Podcast, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you check us out. Check me out on LinkedIn at Coach Lucas Woody if you want to continue to follow the work that we do, or our LinkedIn page, Next Better. Until next time, make it a great day.